Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar speaker series, A Place for Knowledge Exchange. Thank you for joining us and sharing your time with us. Next slide, please. This speaker series is hosted by the College of Rural and Community Development and the International Arctic Research Center to share collaborative approaches to research, education, and real-life community-based practices in rural Alaska. This speaker series is monthly. Our next one is April 18th, and we are also doing quarterly face-to-face collaboration brunches. The next brunch will be on April 5th and will be hosted by IARC. At this time, we'd like to introduce you to our facilitators, and through this project, we have supporting facilitators who have connected with our featured speakers and are in the background facilitating and working on logistics. So in addition to myself, Jessica Black, there is also Josie Sam, Margaret Rudolph, and Santa Roach. Thank you so much for helping to facilitate these sessions. And I'd also like to recognize Susie Tansky from the College of Rural and Community Development for helping with all the logistical support. At this time, I would like to do our land acknowledgement. And here on Troth Yetta campus, everywhere we live and work is native land. We recognize, appreciate, and honor Indigenous peoples and their past, present, and future land stewardship. We are committed to building long-term reciprocal relationships with Indigenous organizations and knowledge holders to create relevant and actionable information in support of their sovereignty and self-determination. And while that land acknowledgement is written, we really work to embody that, and as it states, ensure it is actionable. At this time, I would like to recognize and honor the two dynamic speakers that will talk about uplifting Indigenous knowledge through the nTamamta program, Dr. Sonia Ibarra and Craig Chythlook. We want to thank them in advance of sharing their expertise and knowledge with us today. And as I mentioned, we have Dr. Sonia Ibarra, nTamamta Program Coordinator and Postdoctoral Fellow, and Craig Chythlook, nTamamta Fellow. Before we start, I want to note that our webinar is recorded and will be available for viewing later at UAF, IARC, and CRCD Research Speaker Series websites. And you can utilize the question and answer through our webinar, and our facilitators and speakers will help answer any questions you have at the end. The first part of our webinar is hearing from our speakers, and the second half is for answering questions. With that, our first speaker is Dr. Sonia Ibarra. Welcome, Sonia. I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Masicho, Dr. Black. It's such an honor to be with you all today. Buenas tardes, good afternoon. My name is Sonia Ibarra, and I'll start us off with our presentation today. Just want to acknowledge my people. I'm Apache on my mother's side. I'm Cascana on my father's side, and my family is from Mexico. So I bring with you my family and my ancestors. And it's just so grateful to be with you all today. So I just want to start off our time together by giving just a brief synopsis about nTamamta that we can dive more into in the question and answer discussion portion of this webinar. So nTamamta is an amazing program that I'm so honored to be the program coordinator and postdoctoral fellow. And nTamamta translates into all of us. And it's a program focused on transforming Western and Indigenous fisheries and marine sciences together. And there's a whole list of people on here. And what I want you to focus on is that this team is really growing. We have amazing scholars that we are supporting through this program, through the fellowship program, and Craig will be able to share his experience. And we have a growing team of faculty that are affiliated with our program. And of course, our lead team, Dr. Jessica Black, Doctors Courtney Carruthers, myself, Dr. Charlene Stern, and Peter Wesley. And so to create this transformation that we are hoping to be catalyzers of and support ongoing work that has already been happening, it takes all of us. It takes a big team of us. Next slide, please. One of the reasons why this program came to be is because of this challenging reality of transformation is needed in fisheries education, research, and governance. And so I have some images here that illuminate the criminalization that Indigenous people throughout Alaska have experienced in practicing their ways of life, and in particular for fisheries governance and management. And these inequities are also entrenched in the higher education system as well as research. And there's a quote here that I wanted to share. We're part of a higher education system in Alaska and beyond that has for centuries marginalized Native peoples, cultures, and peoples. And the image on the right of that lone fish is just a stark reality of the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers, where people's smokehouses are no longer full. And it's really heartbreaking. And so this program is part of hoping that hope for that transformation, that hope for that change through a variety of different spheres of influence: research, education, governance, and management. Next slide, please. We have three overarching goals in this program. The first, to support the next generation of Indigenous scientists, allies, and managers, transform graduate education in fisheries and marine sciences, and engage decolonizing and indigenizing approaches widely across UAF and partners. If you'd like to see more details about our program, I really encourage you to check out our website, nTamamta.org, where we have all kinds of series of webinars that really go in depth. And one of the things that I wanted to bring to this webinar today is how I came to be part of nTamamta. Next slide. And one of the just really challenging experiences that I experienced as a recent graduate from the UAF Fisheries Department. And thank you, Santa, for the link for our website is in the chat. And how I came to be the nTamamta program coordinator and postdoctoral fellow, and my journey and the lens and the challenges that I faced in doing transformative work as a student, that we hope nTamamta will be a lot different, a lot supportive environment for this transformational change. Next slide, please. So as I shared earlier, I was a recent graduate from the UAF Fisheries Department in 2021. And my dissertation work primarily focused on weaving Indigenous and Western knowledge. And through this process of working together in community and working really hard to recognize Indigenous harvesters and knowledge holders as experts, I incorporated aspects of research reciprocity into this work. And so on the bottom far right, you'll see an image of, if you're not familiar with this precious food, they are sea cucumbers that we gathered and shared with the community while we're doing the work, and really investing in ways to give back to the community that reflected the values, the priorities, and needs and culture. And so I went on this long and challenging journey of bringing these knowledge systems together. And the challenges wasn't because of the nature of the work, it was because of the institutional challenges that I faced in doing this work. Next slide, please. And so as I started to question power and really think critically about why are these institutional barriers in place, and really dissecting extractive and colonial research practices that I had been trained as a marine scientist leading into my PhD, as I started to question the discipline, the way of doing research, and started to shift to think about critically, how do I center the Indigenous people, the knowledge and their way of life in the region of where my work is situated, and who I would like to work really closely with, which is in Southeast Alaska. As I started to question this power and no longer became compliant, I was made to feel that I was part of the problem. I wasn't playing along. Next slide, please. And so my values began to be questioned by my graduate committee. Not yet. Can you go back one more, please? And my values started to be questioned by my graduate committee. And I once had my advisor share with me, you know, Sonia, you are investing a lot in relationships, in place. You're doing too much. The next time that you want to do something for the community, you need to ask yourself first, what are you going to get out of it? Otherwise, it's not worth your time. So this clash in value systems is what I was experiencing in that moment. I could understand that she was trying to help me manage time and things of that nature, but relationships were key to decolonizing this research process, to centering Indigenous people, Indigenous voices, ways of being. And so there's this constant questioning that I experienced for my graduate committee. Next slide, please. And in this process of decolonizing the research process, and as an adult reconnecting with my indigeneity, spending time on the land, doing dips in the ocean, putting up foods and sharing it with elders, I had graduate students questioning, wow, are you planning for the end of the world? Why do you need to invest all of these things if we have a Costco? So devalidating my journey of healing and reconnecting, even though it's from a different part of the world, and sharing these foods with the communities that have given so much to me, that have taught me so much. Next slide, please. And I also became what felt like a burden to university administrators, and being questioned of, why are you hiring local boat captains? Do you know how to drive a boat? Why don't you bring the university boat down? Why are you relying on the people in these communities to guide you on their own lands? And maybe they didn't say on their own lands, but essentially those were the invisible words that were being questioned towards me. Why are you hiring local boat captains? Why are you working with families to do this work together side by side so that you can adapt this work to ways that make sense? And so I just felt it from so many directions, this questioning. When in community, I felt like I was on the right path. I was being directed in a way that said, like, for the first time ever, we have researchers coming to our communities, listening, letting us guide the work for the first time. And I would come back to the university campus and just feel that, that tension as I questioned that power. And so one of the things I wanted to share in my portion of the presentation is that there's a lot of things that help me to do more than survive through this process. I wanted to thrive. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be heard. I wanted to pave a way for my family, my community, the Indigenous people who I'm working so hard to lift them up, to stand behind them, to guide the way for them so that this process can be easier. And so I just wanted to share some of these strategies that I used. First is grounding myself in my cultural values and my reconnection to that part of myself that had been affected by colonialism. Finding my community. Who are the people that understand the value of this work and see the reason why we armor up, the reason why we push so hard, and healing that trauma that colonialism has caused in my family, that trauma that colonialism has caused in research, in education, in management and governance of fisheries in this state. And so in the middle, I have a picture of my son, and the top right is when I was 6 months pregnant. And so it's been just really important for my journey to really ground myself in healing through that trauma. Next slide, please. And healing the research the trauma caused by research as well. So the roles that I play in nTamamta, I'm part of the nTamamta leadership team. And one of my main priorities and time that I spend is helping nTamamta fellows navigate their graduate journeys and understand those invisible roles that are part of the graduate school process, those invisible boundaries that exist, and helping them push against those boundaries in a way that as a student, I didn't really feel that power. And in this journey of transformation, there's a lot of things that surface: personal journeys, personal hardships, ancestral journeys, ancestral hardships that are awakened in this journey of transformation. And so one of the other things that I try to do to the best of my ability for fellows is help them process those things that may arise in this journey of transformation beyond academic advising or helping advise on their research or those types of things. And one of the things that I'm really proud of nTamamta that's really unique is that we encourage fellows to really slow down in their first year and take the time to develop their work so that there's space for transformation. I know that when I started my journey, I started a very different track in graduate school. And after spending time in community and thinking critically about decolonizing research and myself, I went on a different journey, but I needed that space and time for that transformation to happen. And part of this giving fellows time and space and grace to develop their work is we hope will create opportunities for them to think critically about how they want to do their work, think critically about how to be mindful of extractive and harmful research practices. We've also, part of nTamamta, we've created new courses, and the first time in the fisheries department at UAF, there's an Indigenous Fisheries of Alaska course. That has never happened, which is shocking. I just want to emphasize that. Indigenous people have been managing and stewarding fisheries for thousands of years, and the UAF fisheries program until nTamamta did not have a course to highlight, center, and recognize that legacy. So it's just so powerful course that we hope to keep going. And we've also been hosting racial equity dialogues because we've recognized that we have lots of amazing allies and folks that want to lift up our program. They're on the spectrum of learning and recognizing the inequities that are still existing, the racism that exists in fisheries and across other sectors. And so one of the things that we've been doing is having these really challenging but deep conversations about race and racism, inequities in fisheries, to get at a common understanding and find pathways for moving forward within our individual spheres of influence. And so with that, I will pass the mic to Craig, and just so honored, Craig, to be sharing space with you. You are a treasure, and I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Ibarra. Hi, everybody. Craig Chythlook. We can go ahead and forward to the next slide, please. So I recognize a lot of names that are in attendance here, and I'm very excited to be chatting and sharing my experience so far with nTamamta. Thank you, Dr. Ibarra. I think that summary and all of the points you brought up are amazing and just making me feel quite a bit better. You paved a very beautiful path. So I'm originally from the Bristol Bay area. For folks that don't know who I am or a little bit about my background, my family and lineage has been from that region for quite a while. Yupik of descent. Got a name that is mischievous in nature. It's Skaviak. It means red fox. It's an adopted name from a next door neighbor who passed away right before I was born. My folks still live out in that neck of the woods, Joe and Molly Chythlook. They've been involved with fisheries and tribal governance and corporate work, like all the things for quite a long time, and been fishers and hunters and nomadic and kind of all of the things. So feel very lucky to have had very strong leadership growing up by folks that were always interested and willing to participate in the decision-making space, both at the state and federal level. Currently, my wife and two boys and I and a little dachshund dog live here in Fairbanks. We moved back up here in 2017 so I could start my undergraduate journey again post baby number one, working on the North Slope in the oil fields at the time. Ended up being quite a bit of time away. So that kind of spurred off this, well, maybe we should go back to school and think about what we want to do when we grow up. So that's kind of where I am today. I still really love going back home and doing all of the things that you see in this photo. Been a subsistence user for quite a while, but I've also been a commercial fisherman my whole life. I've been on the waters of the Nishigak and other areas of our region since 1987. I haven't missed a summer bobbing around out in the water out there with my family. So that's kind of the background and history that led me into thinking about fisheries, getting an education in fisheries, and kind of having it grounded in this beautiful picture that Dr. Ibarra has talked about, grounded in home, in Indigenous governance, kind of a perspective and a positionality that is reflective of what it feels like to go home and fish and talk to my family and friends. So next slide, please. A little bit about my peers. So just a sales pitch out there. I think Tamamta should be like all of CFOS. This intentionality, this thought process, this support and love. It's amazing. And I'm very honored to have been asked or chosen, whatever, to participate in this cohort of amazing folks. In the bottom picture here, just to show and explain to everybody how intentional leadership is, that includes Dr. Ibarra and Jessica and everybody. We start out the school year by coming together on the land, the Howard Loop Camp here in Fairbanks. We have connection to place when we start talking about theoretical, when we start talking about why we are here, when we start thinking about how to move forward. We have relationships with each other. We have relationships with place. So it's just incredibly intentional about slowing down, participating, and just having a cup of tea, joking, laughing, and making us feel very connected and comfortable, like really broadening and strengthening the students' foundation to participate in this very inequitable, very racist, this space is full of erasure, and a lot of other things. So being incredibly intentional and supportive and creating this time. Looking back, it's been very, very much appreciated. So my fellow cohort are listed here. As you can see, we're pretty diverse with different tribes and regional entities. Lauren Devine is actually on the call, I saw, who may know a couple of these wonderful folks. But yeah, doing a lot of amazing work. The other part that's really awesome that I really appreciated about, we're of different ages, we're different careers, there's a mix of PhD and masters. We're all busy. Several of us, I think half of the group are parents. Very, very intentional about the selection and creating a cohesive group of peers to work together, like throughout the program. But I am really excited to build a relationship with my cohort and then the other cohorts to have like a lifetime of relationality, of co-producing, co-mingling, supporting, and having this like constant network of just awesomeness from a group of peers that will be likely involved in these equity management and all of these spaces for a very long time. So there's just been a lot of thought that has gone into this. Next slide, please. These are some of the few courses that I really appreciated, and some of the activities. Dr. Ibarra mentioned pretty much all of them. Very thorough, very appreciative of. So like one of the thoughts and one of the supports from Dr. Black, Dr. Carruthers, Dr. Ibarra, all of the affiliated faculty helping teaching the class. They come in supporting, but they're also very empowering. And a really good example of this is to continue to ask the fellows to participate in things like racial equity dialogues and North Pacific Fishery Management Council meetings, and just supporting our other existing bodies of work. There's a lot of recognition that we are coming in learning, but we're also coming in with a lot of expertise and knowledge on a lot of different subjects. And I say that, it sounds a little boastful, but in reality, for somebody who identifies as a Fisher dude, it's been very impactful and empowering. And the reason being, in a lot of these classes that I'm very happy are hopefully going to be institutionalized for CFOS, and like I think every single university that has a fisheries program should continue this vein of thought. There's a lot of gaslighting that happens in academia, in policy. I was required to take a Western history of art class to get my graduate degree. A lot of business courses. There's a lot of just like erasure and moving forward with kind of this monolithic idealism of we are incorporated, we're moving together under the evaluation criteria of we're making money. And a lot of these things, and it's absolutely everywhere, and the education and the College of Fisheries, business, whatever, it's all the exact same thing. So when you ask people that are fisher people, that are hunters, that are advocating for a tribal constitution or governance or stewardship, it's really difficult to see how storytelling, how spirituality, how a relationship with place can take a leading role in these discussions. The information that was shared in this class, these classes, and a lot of the seminar that we're taking right now, or decolonizing our own minds and how we think of ourselves and how we think we can contribute to both state and federal process that's going to lead to better and more equitable regulation and policy in the future. And so much of that that we have learned from this short semester of intense dialogue is reaffirmation that Indigenous knowledge is incredibly valid. It's incredibly objective. It's complete science. There's no need for validation. There's no need for interpretation or inclusion into Western methodology or science. It's completely standalone. And there's so much power in that just fundamental understanding, number one. But a lot of these goes into the law. So not only are we learning to decolonize our brains, we're giving information that leads into both federal and state trust and fiduciary responsibility, so that we are learning information, but we're also being very intentional about being actionable. There's folks on the line here that I see that are creating community-based monitoring programs based off of tribal constitutions, data sovereignty, all of these things to uplift tribal governance and stewardship and stop asking for permission are things that the Tamamta program is teaching its students. So next slide, please. This is another just kind of brief recognitions of some of the things that I really appreciated. Political history of tribes and resources management. Carrie Stevens, through her seminar, gave us a really good rundown of the political history in the very, very intentional racism and erasure and the disconnect between Indigenous knowledge to place and land and management. So again, broadening our foundation and understanding, decolonizing, de-gaslighting, and showing the Western process to control and incorporate. Read it all, two-eyed seeing. I think a lot of you all know or have probably read this. One of the things that is most important to me that I learned from this is towards the end of this paper and a lot of her other talks, she goes into the facts that Indigenous cultures are not a monolith. Tamamta is about all of us. It incorporates our Indigenous values and principles and understandings, but it also very recognizes tribal governance and sovereignty. My nationality and responsibility is to the Electric Traditional Council, the Turian Traditional Councils, Manicotic and Togak. We have a different vision and mission for our area, our region, than maybe folks in the Southeast or Central Alaska or on the North Slope. And that's very acceptable. We are led by a broad umbrella of Indigenous knowledge. We share a lot of values and principles, but we're responsible to our nations, to our communities, and to our children. And we are not a monolith, so there's no idealism in being Indigenous. There's no noble savagery. We are responsible to our own governance and institutions. We don't have to abide by anybody else's rules, federal, state, or even other Indigenous groups. It's sounding divisive, but in reality, it is wholly and completely supporting the idea of governance and sovereignty for your tribe. Harris and I can't enunciate that last time, sorry, but the 4 R's have been just fundamental. And then one of the things that I really appreciated most about a lot of the coursework is sort of digging into definitions in the history of science. Been on a research project here and there, and it's been frustrating. One of the most beneficial things about this program to me is it's giving me a broader understanding about the history of Western academics and science. The ontology and epistemologies and the differences between Western and Indigenous have been incredibly helpful. One of the things that I think is touted the most in management or like whatever federal governing body that decides on budgets and how time and money are allocated, this PhD, this Western academic is kind of the gold standard. It's very objective. It's science. It's statistics. It's driven by objectivity that removes person from place, takes the human out of the science. Absolutely ridiculous. Number one. We heard from we've heard Wilson Justin, and other Indigenous scholars. We've gotten a lot of information from different regions in the state of Alaska that goes against the status quo, that we need to be a certain way, that we have to fit into this Western mold, that storytelling is a very appropriate and perfect methodology for sharing information that is factual. It's Indigenous. Mary Hofstadter said that it's our indigenuity. Our ways of knowing, our ways of sharing information is perfect, in my opinion. It's community. It's led with love. There's no need to validate. And that's exactly the opposite that everybody who sits in maybe some certain committees or this and that for the last, I don't know, 50 years since MSA or limited entry, they have been taught completely otherwise. And that's been the status quo for a very long time. One of the things that I want to get out, I know I've been rambling a lot, is the notion that so much of Western academia is objective. One of the definitions that I heard in our recent classes, the best model is one that works. And the only way to make a model work is the subjective and thoughts and interpretations by the modeler to put the correct information into that model so it gets a result that's expected and normal. It's a learned observation. It's through experience. It takes time. It takes relations to something, the variables that are plugged into this analysis with, whatever regression analysis, whatever the methodology might be. It's the same exact thing with Indigenous knowledge. We are in relation to place. We either hear stories or maybe we physically sit and watch and we learn, we test, we hypothesize. It's our understanding of management and ability to govern and predict is much more holistic, in my opinion. It's quite a bit better because there's so many less limitations on a lot of the Indigenous ontologies and methodologies than academia and modeling. But no, I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting lost or sidetracked a little bit. The main point that I want to make on this is there's a gold standard around the objectivity of modeling. And anecdotal is generally the coin that Indigenous knowledge gets when people and elders are coming in to tell a story, to testify on any given NEPA requirement or any council process. But that story is learned and verified through the same exact methodology, through learned observation, through testing the hypothesis, to having a really in-depth understanding of the ecology. I mean, it's all there. And we spend quite a bit of time learning about that and how to articulate that and how to lean into some of the federal and state fiduciary and trust responsibilities to kind of get that message across. So next slide, please. So how is Tamamta helping me as a scholar? Earlier, Sonia had talked about Tamamta gives us space and time to slow down. I wasn't forced to get onto a project. I didn't have to do something I didn't want to do. I didn't have to worry about asking to build relationships. I mean, the entire intent of my master's thesis, and I pitched this to my committee, is to build a relationship and reconnect with Electric, my home community and tribe, and they loved that idea. So I'm using my education to reconnect and build a relation and recenter the position, the interests, and the needs of my tribe. So listening was a big part of the creation of my thesis. Being in relation, I mean, I know everybody, so it's a lot of my family, not a huge ask. One of the more important and exciting bits of work that have come out of the Bristol Bay region, and a lot of my opinion, honestly, is a place name program that's been happening since the late 90s. There's a lot of GIS work about it. The intent and the purpose of this project is to rename and retake ownership of space in our area. So we're looking to build and expand on that for my thesis work. And so far, we're going to be connecting and partnering with United Tribes of Bristol Bay, our village corporation, our regional for-profit corporation, and our tribe are all very interested in participating and contributing and kind of helping with the process. The main goals are to think about data sovereignty, data creation, and data control. That we create information, we own the information, we create protocols. We spend a lot of time uplifting governance and sovereignty and the type of information that comes out of our region that is approved and appropriate from our elders and from storytelling, from like our own Indigenous methodologies. So Tamamta is allowing for this relationship building. It's paying us to build relations. It's paying for travel. The group is paying for honorary and stipend to pay our elders really well. So it's just been a very amazing experience, I think. So yeah, and I think this might be my last slide. We can go forward one more. Yeah, okay. This might be it. So I know I kind of rambled on a lot here and there. But I think in closing, it's just been really important to just note that without this opportunity, it would have been really difficult to get this level of engagement, buy-in, and participation at all levels of tribal governance in my region. Tried it before, it's really difficult. So when we have the opportunity to focus on relationality, be in place, listen, and approach with kind of that attitude, that humility, and it's been really good. And I just want to thank Tamamta and its leadership for being very intentional about creating that space for us students. So thank you.
Gracias, and going on to Dr. Ibarra and Craig. I just, even being part of this program, I've learned so much just listening to you both speak and your reflections and how you have worked so ethically, with humility, and in right relationship with communities, and really reflecting on your roles in academia. What is our responsibility to respond to community needs, not our needs as researchers, but the needs of our community and what they are asking for. And so I just want to commend you both for the excellent presentation and just deep reflection. I think there's so much to learn from you both. So masicho. I also want to direct our participants to Craig and Dr. Ibarra's bios that are in the chat for you to read. We have a few questions, so I will read these questions, and feel free to, I'll read the 3 questions, and then you both can just take turns answering them. We have about 10 minutes for questions. And for those who are listening in and tuning in, please feel free to ask questions. And even if we don't get to them all, I think it just really helps us to reflect on all that was shared. Before I ask some questions, any comments from my co-hosts and co-team here before I move forward with the questions? Okay. So the questions that we have are, I'm sure you have a climate change as part of this program, question mark. The second question, if traditional Western science is to publish research in scientific journals, is there a format for Indigenous science such as yourself in the nTamamta program to be shared in the form of storytelling, like an Indigenous storytelling journal that non-Indigenous individuals can acknowledge, learn from, and practice as a way of supporting Indigenous cultures, yet at the same time is accessible and distributed to a vast audience? That's another question. And then are there any efforts to have the nTamamta program expand relationships towards a national fishery responsibility? Example, a nTamamta representative for across the nation. So those are some of the questions that were asked, and feel free to just respond to any of those.
I can kick us off, and Craig, please chime in. For the first question about climate change in the program, in getting to spend some time with each of the fellows and learning about their research and navigating their research process, climate change is a factor that is acknowledged through all of their research in a variety of different ways. And one of the things that I think it's really important to recognize is that climate change is a factor that Indigenous people have been very well aware of throughout the state for a long time. And because of this, how this state is situated in this part of the world, that experience, that lived experience, has been something that a lot of fellows have talked about, changes that they've observed, and how that's not affected fisheries and ways of life. So that's something that's acknowledged in their work. I think it's really important to also note that a lot of the fisheries crashes that are happening along the state, climate change is one variable that has contributed to it, but also the way that fisheries are being managed. We have so many crashes across this entire state. And so, what the management schemes that are, or scenarios that are being used aren't working. Something needs to change. And there's a huge body of knowledge that's missing. And so I guess that's something I just wanted to note, is that fellows are thinking about it, they're writing about it. And we also really need to create space for recognizing how things are not working and the erasure that happens and that knowledge that is not included in management now.
Masicho, Dr. Ibarra. Craig, would you like to weigh in on any of those questions?
I guess just to kind of expand a little bit, there's a lot of focus on creating more information. There's a lot of calls out for climate change as a factor for like phenology, whatever, a change in this and that. There's a lot of information out there already. I think one of the more important things to think about is moving and taking action with what we have already in front of our faces. If we prioritize academia and research for the next 10 years to get more information, we may not be worried about a fishery. So when I think about being asked stuff like the importance of this and that, it's all very important to collect more data. One of the things that I love about Tamamta is, in replace of information, it's building representation. So that when we have types of data presented in front of a council, like local knowledge, traditional knowledge, and subsistence protocols, and traditional ecological knowledge being presented at the board level, we have the right people in those seats to act on the existing information that's being presented to them currently, today, yesterday, for the last 30 years. So I don't, to Eric's, I don't think, there's a lot of things that are difficult with a lot of different systems. The other big part that I love about Tamamta, it's not necessarily one without the other. Indigenous and Western science, it's a very intentional utilization of both, with recognition that they're each standalone. And they're both valid, they're both very useful. So I don't know if anything is perfect, but that's just the only other thing that I want to really point out. That the name is literally all of us. So be incredibly intentional and actionable instead of just creating information for the sake of creating information. Use what we got and build the skills from the tribes and from the community so that they are decision-making seats, as opposed to going down the rabbit hole of why things are changing. And then really lean into the recognition of Indigenous knowledge as its standalone own right. Listen to stories. And if you don't understand the story, find somebody who does, so that the interpretation can happen and the utilization of that information can lead to management decision. it's not an issue with the data that's being presented in front of you. It's a lack of understanding of what's being being presented in front of you. It's not the validity of Indigenous knowledge. It's our inability to understand the stories. So if that means paying for more Indigenous butts and seats early on and often, that's probably a pretty solid route moving forward.
Masit Cho, Craig, thank you for that. And Sonia, maybe we can finish up with some words if you wanted to share to Eric's question. What advice do you have for advisors and colleagues on how to better support and uplift Indigenous students and researchers within our imperfect academic system? Did you want to add anything as we close out today?
Sure. That's a really great question and such an important question. So that's why I paused and took a deep breath. I think one of the many ways that we can help create these supportive environments is we advise and we mentor in the way that we're most familiar with. And that can continue cycles of abuse or trauma in academia. And so one of the things that, as I heal from my graduate journey, and in this role of mentorship is recognizing that there was differences in value systems in my previous advising experience. And so creating space to get to know the student and understand their values, understand their priorities, and recognize that these are not empty cups that are meant to be filled. Our nTamamta fellows are leaders, have deep experiences. And so in our program, we really are very intentional in the language that we use to get away from this deficit narrative that students are empty cups to be filled, and creating space for their knowledge and expertise. And as a part of the lead team, we learn a lot from the fellows. A lot of learning in terms of knowledge, in terms of how we could be adapting the program. Where are our blind spots? What are we missing? What are things that we have inherited from our participation and experience in higher education systems that we may or may not be perpetuating? And as we're in this decolonizing journey, it's a journey of continued work. And so just creating space for students to be their authentic selves, as when Craig shared, he wants to connect back to his community, facilitating that process. That should be as important as it is in writing his thesis. And it is, and we're trying to prioritize that in the mentorship of his journey. And so I think that's one way, and recognizing that students may have expectations from their families, their immediate family if they have children, or their aunts and their uncles and their grandparents, and there's responsibilities. And how can those responsibilities be honored within the graduate school process? Because when I was in graduate school, I was really pressured by my committee to sever those relationships, those responsibilities, and say, you're a student, this is what you have to do now. Leave all of that behind, leave yourself behind, leave your values behind. And so I think pushing against that model is important. And we have a little bit more time, and I would just want to pass on to Craig as a student and nTamamta fellow, anything he'd like to share.
Nope. I just thank you all for your time. It was definitely an honor coming and co-presenting with you, Dr. Ibarra. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you to Dr. Ibarra. Thank you to Craig. You both are brilliant and amazing, and we are so honored to have you share time with us and just all the preparation that went into your presentation. Masicho, thank you very much. And thank you to all our participants who are online with us. And I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but they are very valuable. Like you putting your questions out there, it gives us a lot to think about. Please join us next month. And it was great to spend an hour with you all. Take care, everyone.